Hi, my name is Allison McDonald. I'm going to be presenting work I did with my colleagues on how sex workers stay safe online. So first, some context for the study. Sex work is broadly defined as the exchange of sexual services for money. And like most other professions, different parts of the work have migrated online in the last few decades. So for example, sex workers may see clients in person, but use the internet to advertise or collect payment. They may use the internet to build community with other sex workers, and some sex workers may work exclusively online, for example, by doing live erotic shows on camera. However, sex work is still criminalized in most of the world and highly stigmatized. This means that in addition to the general risks that sex workers are going to be managing, like aggressive or obsessive clients, they may also be facing harassment, police violence, and discrimination, all of which may happen online or be exacerbated by technology. So we wanted to investigate how this population, which has a significant need to stay safe online, thinks about safety, what the major barriers to staying safe online are, and the strategies that they use to meet these safety goals. So with this, we hope to better support sex workers in staying safe, as well as learn how security tools and strategies succeed or fail for highly motivated users who depend on them. We began this investigation through semi-structured interviews with 29 sex workers in Germany and Switzerland, where sex work is legal but regulated. We conducted these interviews in German and English over an end-to-end encrypted video conferencing service and allowed participants to choose whether the interview was over video, voice, or chat. Based on some of the emergent themes in our interviews, we designed a follow-up survey, which was completed by 65 sex workers in Germany, Switzerland, and the UK, which is also a region where sex work is legal but regulated. We asked several closed response questions about common protective strategies to get a sense of their prevalence, and one open-ended question about how they define safety, which we analyzed with our interview responses to the same question. All of our study protocols were also reviewed by a sex worker consultant for appropriateness. So first, I want to present our synthesis of how participants define safety. We asked this question in both interviews and surveys because knowing the holistic safety priorities of sex workers is central to understanding their decisions around how to protect themselves. We identified 7 dimensions of safety: physical safety, financial security, being able to set clear boundaries, respect both interpersonally and from society, privacy, legality, and access to community. So we identify these different dimensions, but most important to know is that they are very intertwined with one another. The ability to meet one of these goals may depend on multiple others. So I'll give an example of how that works. So this participant said, if I had the financial pressure to accept jobs against my better judgment, like someone demanding a service I don't offer, I would be unsafe. So in this case, the financial security is necessary in order to maintain boundaries with clients and to ensure their physical safety. Because these goals can be in tension, we heard throughout our interviews that participants sometimes compromise on one safety goal to ensure another. For example, using an electronic payment service rather than cash, even though it might expose their legal name to a client. So next, I'm going to discuss a few sources of risk to these privacy goals. Unsurprisingly, clients can pose a major source of risk. They can be aggressive and invade a sex worker's privacy. The sex work advertising ecosystem can also be predatory. Some platforms steal and republish content without the worker's permission, leading to unwanted exposure. What we heard from our participants and also from the literature more broadly is that the more sex work is legal, the safer sex workers are, because they can access social services, report bad dates to police, and so on. But even laws that regulate businesses generally and the internet can be a source of risk. So for example, Germany has an imprint requirement, which says that businesses must disclose their name, address, and contact information somewhere on their website. This means that sex workers with websites must either disclose sensitive information or risk violating the law. And finally, other online platforms like payment processors and social media platforms make staying safe online difficult for sex workers. Some platforms discriminate against sex workers outright. So for example, several participants described being banned from Airbnb despite never using the platform for anything related to sex work. In this example, the participant said that they used different photos, different email addresses, and different phone numbers, and they still ended up banned. In this case, the source of the information leak is not clear, making defending against this type of exposure really difficult. We heard similar problems with social media platforms making inferences behind the scenes, resulting in, for example, family finding work accounts or clients finding a personal account, despite the worker taking every effort to keep these accounts separate. And finally, I'm going to highlight some of the strategies that sex workers have used to stay safe. Several of these strategies were offline strategies that are just augmented by the internet. So covering or checking in with a friend or colleague before and after an appointment, for example, may now happen over video call. And similarly, sex workers have always had methods for warning each other about bad clients, but now some of that has moved online, like through private groups or regional forums. We asked directly about security and privacy settings, but by and large, they were not considered useful. Among our survey respondents, only 35% said that they depended on security settings to stay safe. Frequently, this was attributed to a lack of trust in the tech. And this lack of trust led to alternate, often more manual solutions. So for example, this participant removes phones from the room whenever they're talking about a sensitive topic. Similarly, few sex workers used security tools. We asked about encrypted chat, VPN, encrypted email, which could be both PGP, but also Proton Mail, Tor, password managers, and cryptocurrency. Some of the reasons given for not using these tools were similar to what's been found in other studies, that they were too much effort or not visibly effective. But for our participants, some of them wanted to use these tools, but they interfered with other safety goals they were trying to meet. So for example, one participant said that they wanted to use a VPN, but the advertising service they used required you to log in from an IP in the country in which you were advertising, which just made using a VPN difficult. This is a good example of how sometimes not using a privacy tool like a VPN is not a failure to take a protective measure, but a calculated safety decision that also takes financial opportunity into account. Another challenge with these tools is that many of them depend on clients to participate in order to work. So for example, if a client is non-Signal, the sex worker can't use Signal for work either. So although sex workers by and large weren't using security and privacy tools, they did have highly developed strategies for staying safe online. And identity management was a big component of this. Many sex workers discuss how keeping their work and personal personas separate online was critical for maintaining privacy, boundaries, and physical safety. So this might work, for example, through using an alias for work or keeping separate accounts and devices. However, this separation was often difficult to maintain over time. So this participant says that it's time-consuming, annoying, and stressful to have all these phones and personas and things I have to remember. Over time, it just becomes more and more likely that they're going to make a mistake, which could out them as a sex worker to family or expose private information to clients. And as in the Airbnb example, even when they do everything as perfectly as possible, their accounts and identities might still be linked through unintelligible data aggregation. Our participants also talked about various forms of self-censorship, like editing images to remove their faces and identifying tattoos, and opting out of personal social media rather than trusting platform privacy settings. In another example of a manual solution preferred over settings, occasionally they may even completely delete work accounts. So this participant explains that even though they work legally, they are worried about being banned from countries that don't like sex work. And so they delete work accounts, websites, and completely wipe their phone before traveling. And finally, a prevalent theme from our interviews was that many participants felt resigned to unwanted exposure. This participant said that despite the fact that they know the consequences could be getting killed or deported, they still mixed up devices and accounts. Past mistakes are also hard to undo. So participants sometimes dismissed the idea of adopting security tools going forward because they had already intermingled their accounts and they felt that there was no going back. So to return to our question of how to support sex workers, it's important to note that most of the most serious risks are not solvable with technology, stigma, risky laws, and discrimination. But we can identify a few common ways that existing security tools fail to meet the needs of this population, and I'll mention 2 here. First, most tools aren't built for users with multiple personas. This is a documented risk for other users as well. For example, trans people may use different names for different audiences as they're coming out. Intentionally allowing users to have multiple siloed accounts would go a long way to helping users stay safe with less effort. In a similar vein, transparent or more restrictive data use policies that allow users to understand how their own accounts may be connected or how platforms might be labeling them behind the scenes is as critical or more important than having intuitive privacy settings. But just because they weren't using security tools doesn't mean that sex workers didn't have sophisticated protective strategies. Our participants highlighted several new technical sex work tools that could help them in particular, like improved client vetting systems and covering apps. But especially in light of how existing tools fail to consider the holistic needs of high-risk populations, it's important that tools built for sex work are led by sex workers who have the best knowledge of their needs. So in summary, digital safety has multiple interdependent axes, and sex workers are optimizing their safety across all of these axes. In some cases, technical tools are falling short and are largely untrusted. And so sex workers have developed sophisticated alternate digital safety strategies that they're using instead. Thank you for listening.